What's up, everyone? It's Ryan checking in once more for Walk It Off Sports, and we are deep into the college football season. It's just flying by. After this Saturday, the Dawgs will be halfway through their regular season, and we have a big test coming up this week. I'll touch on here in just a minute, but so far, I will admit I am a fan of Georgia. I did not play competitive football very long in life. I'm short and fat, and wasn't super fat back in the day, but still was never athletic enough to really, have any kind of future in football. So all of my opinions, of course, are coming from a fan perspective. So just throwing that out there before I get along any deeper into this video. But I tell you, as a fan of the 2025, 2026 Georgia football team, I gotta say I am quite worried for the future of this season, and that's based on my eyes, right? I don't go to practices. You haven't talked to coaches or players, anything like that. All I know is what I see, and that's what fans usually go off of, right? So going into the season, I was cautiously optimistic, as I always am as a Georgia fan. Had some questions. I am kind of the belief nowadays that Kirby's going to play the best players that he has on his roster. It doesn't matter what your name is. It doesn't matter how long you've been playing that position. When Stetson Bennett was being played at quarterback for a little while there, I was like, man, he can't be the best quarterback option. Well, it turns out he was. So then, comes time for Carson Beck to be the quarterback, and he's the quarterback. He had never beat out Stetson Bennett, but he was the best option at the time, and he, I believe, proved that. I think last year there were a lot of glaring issues with this team. I think part of it was on him. Again, not being in the locker room, not talking to anyone in the locker room, I really have no way of confirming my suspicions. But, as a lot of fans, suspect, it almost seemed to me like he not necessarily lost the locker room, but didn't have the players wanting to play for him as much as, say, Gunnar Stockton does. And really, all that I have to go off of on that is how excited they were when Gunnar came in and helped win the SEC championship game last year, right? So this year rolls around, and it's Gunnar's team, right? But again, he was there with Carson Beck. So just kind of like Carson Beck was there with Stetson, was never able to beat Stetson out, you have to believe, well, Stetson was the better quarterback. Carson and Gunnar are there together at the same time. Carson's the quarterback. Gunnar wasn't good enough to beat him out. So now Gunnar's there, and he's leading the way. Gunnar's been up and down, but it is his first year leading the team as a true starter. So, willing to cut him some slack. And he's looked good at times. At times he's looked a little lost. Everybody can kind of be a little guilty of that as well. But again, it just kind of goes back to that, he was on the team and he wasn't starting. So in my mind, Kirby's not going to say, well, Gunnar's best quarterback we have, but I'm not going to start him. That's just not going to happen. So, and you can do that for any position on the team, right? Nate Frazier could potentially be the best running back on the team, but he's had some fumble issues. So now Chauncey Bowens is getting some more opportunities, and transfer McCrary is a good, bruising type back, short distance, type running back guy that you need on a football team. So those guys are now getting opportunities to, be the best guy. But training camp, everything that leads up to that, and preseason, obviously it was Nate Frazier. I can't dispute that, right? But things can change, right? So, going into the season, looking at the quarterback position, I was cautiously optimistic. But I'll tell you where I can admit that it seems like I drank the Kool-Aid that I maybe shouldn't have drank so hard. And that's on the defensive side of the ball, and more specifically the defensive line / linebacker group. Now, I don't want to sound like, I'm just regurgitating what, everybody else says online about lack of pass rush, but I was super excited about some of the names that we had. And to an extent, I believe CJ Allen and Raylan Wilson and Chris Cole have lived up to the hype a little bit, and you can kind of see them making some strides along the way. But there's a lot of other guys in that group, that position group, defensive line / linebacker, defensive end, whatever you want to call those guys, hybrid, kind of cross back and forth or whatever, that are frankly on milk cartons for this team. And that's what scares me the most about what's coming down the line for this University of Georgia football team. My dog Mike has touched on multiple times, did a great job about, his feelings on Glenn Schumann and on how the Alabama game went. And I said before that game to Mike and some of my other friends that Glenn Schumann needed to show me something in that Alabama game. Now, granted, it took a couple of drives to, really make some tweaks. And then in the second half, we didn't give up any points. So maybe some of the adjustments started clicking, whatever the case may be. But the fact still remains, if you give the quarterback time in the pocket, our defensive back secondary is not good enough to keep up and maintain with the level of receivers that the SEC has long enough to prevent big plays from happening, right? Gave up big plays against Tennessee, got exposed. And I was like, well, maybe that's a good thing that we get exposed against Tennessee, because now we have an off week. We have a couple of weeks to get ready for Bama. We can correct those issues. Well, then come out, get exposed again against Alabama. Zero pressure. Just, again, beating a dead horse. But it's not just me saying that. It's former players on Twitter saying it. You have David Pollocks, you have the Davin Bellamy's, you have Tavares King. I saw something today, said he feels like the defense needs to get back to being mean, right? This is coming from former players, right? So me agreeing with them, again, kind of sounds like I'm beating a dead horse, but it kind of reinforces what my eyes are seeing. It's like, gosh, this team really kind of sold me on, whether they meant to or not, kind of some false hope on that side of the ball. Now, granted, they are very young. It's littered with, the defense is littered with freshmen and sophomores. But you do have some experience there. Jonell Aguero's got some experience. KJ Bolden, he's been a starter since day one, basically. CJ Allen, who, again, I said is playing well. He's got experience. But, you brought in that Elo Medozi, a lot of hype surrounded around him. He hasn't done anything. Joseph Jonah Ajonye, a lot of hope, around him. He is coming off an injury last year, so, cut him a little bit of slack. But, Christian Miller's been there for a while. And what I will say is our run defense is elite, right? So, that D-line, they keep stuff on the run like they do. Then hopefully we can find some answers on the back end to kind of, mitigate some of these big chunk plays that we're giving up. One thing I will touch on as far as the chunk plays, hindsight 2020, right? It always is. I kind of wish Ryan Williams would have caught that touchdown in the first quarter that he dropped, because if he catches that, they still, in that drive, I do believe, and you guys can correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe they still went on to get a touchdown in that drive. And what happened was they didn't get it super quick, so they ate up 2, 3 more, 4 minutes more that, of game clock that they would have not eaten up had Ryan Williams caught that ball for a touchdown, and maybe given us enough time to, who knows, make a comeback and win. But, I don't want to touch too much on that game because we've already played Kentucky since then. I kind of wanted to see how the team responded, especially to a 12 o'clock showing after a huge letdown game against Bama. I figured we kind of get off to a little bit of a sleepy start. Had a really great drive to start, right? Found ourselves up 21-7. Everything was looking hunky-dory. But again, like right before the half, the defense just kind of, lets them move right on down the field. And that was the thing about Kentucky. Like the times they moved the ball, it was really quick, right? It was big plays. But it's lack of pressure, right? We actually did end up getting a couple of sacks in that game. One was kind of a garbage time when we were up big, and quarterback's probably holding the ball a little too long. Had a backup D lineman, Boko, get in there and get a sack, or maybe he just needs a little more chance to play. Maybe he'll get some more. Who knows? If he does get more opportunities, but that's for Kirby to decide. But anyway, it was 21-7 right before the half, and they moved right down the field, and you're sitting there saying, well, shit, if they get a touchdown here, I mean, they're on like the 10-yard line, they get the ball after the break. So this game could be 21-21 within, the first 5 minutes of the second half, right? And, thank goodness the defense kind of, stepped up, and then somehow or another, the kicker, I don't know how you yank a kick that far left. I mean, again, I'm short and fat, and I can maybe count, the number of attempts that I've had at a field goal. It's definitely never been in the game setting, but I could probably count the number of attempts I've had on, using all my fingers, maybe a couple of toes here and there. But I just don't see how a kicker who does that every single day of their life, who's been doing it for years, yanks one as far left as he did. I mean, he missed that 408 yards to the left. But anyway, got lucky there, right? Instead of it being 21-10, it's 21-7 still. And we know how the second half kind of happened, played out the rest of the time. But that's kind of how Georgia's been the past year or so, right? Uncle Lou, famous YouTuber, he mentioned, before the Kentucky game, how Georgia hadn't led at half in over 8 months, right? So, I think we've been tied a couple of times, but we've been down to all the other, and that's just to the Power 4 teams that we played in the last 8 months. We not led at all at the half. So we did end that streak, yay, but it was to Kentucky, who is probably the worst team in the SEC with, I think, a lame duck head coach. But came out, got the win. Can't be too mad about how we played. We got to see a lot of backups play, which is good. Can only help you down the line, right? I will say I did like, seeing Puglisi come in there and sling it. I do like his arm, but again, going back to the best player, he's not the best quarterback right now. It doesn't matter what you think. Kirby sees him every day. We're not at practice every day. Right now, the best quarterback is Gunner. Good or bad, indifferent, whatever the case may be. He, the game may never, come down to something he does or doesn't do. It may all be on the defense, going forward. We'll see. But that's who we've got to live and die by now. So, coming up, we have Auburn, right? So, at Auburn, at night, they're going to be honoring, I don't know if they're retiring Cam Newton's number or what they're doing, but it's going to be wild, right? Auburn hasn't beat us since they beat us in the regular season in 2017. Of course, we quickly got our revenge in the SEC championship game that season. But it's been a long time since Auburn beat us. And, South's oldest rivalry was rival games. We have a million rivals, it seems. People want to, say we, rival basically anybody we play, which is not true. But Auburn obviously is one of the top rivals on Georgia's schedule year in and year out. And I won't dive too much into my disdain for Greg Sankey. And this may be, just a Georgia fan crying about your schedule. You play in the same, SEC teams or the other SEC teams have to play, and you play them at home one year last year, and you play them on the road this year, whatever the case may be, blah, blah, blah. But, and again, you guys can maybe help me out with this. I haven't done the research, so if anybody wants to, feel free. But one thing about Georgia's schedule this year, you can say, okay, yeah, hey, great. We got Texas and Ole Miss and Alabama. We had to go on the road to all three of those guys last year. Took it on the chin twice. We get them all at home now, right? Already lost to Bama. So, no surprise there. We're going to lose to Alabama for the rest of the time. I'm no longer convincing myself that we're ever beating them again until I see it at least 3 times in a row. And then after that, I still probably won't pick us. But anyway, Greg Sankey did find a little way to really kind of screw us over. And, if this isn't even Greg Sankey's call, which obviously he's the commissioner of the SEC, so, I would believe he's got some sort of, say so in the scheduling. But Auburn was sitting home this past weekend, resting up, healing up, getting ready to go while we're playing 12 o'clock against Kentucky. And granted, we were at home. We didn't have to go on the road. So, but they're sitting at home, not getting beat on, getting guys healthy, watching game film, watching live games, of Georgia, right? Getting better, theoretically, you would like to think. And, meanwhile, Georgia, with their 2 byes, they had a bye before Bama. Well, Bama had a bye too. We have a bye before Florida. Well, Florida has a bye too, right? Well, not only do we have to go to Auburn, the week after, we have Ole Miss coming in. Top 4 team, right? No disputing how good Ole Miss is, right? You can say, well, Auburn is still not that good, but they have some elite wide receivers, and they have a quarterback that if you give him time, can pick you apart with those elite wide receivers. Because on the back end, we have some guys struggling to maintain some coverage. And again, not all of it's on them. It's hard to cover for 8, 9, 10 seconds, however long they're having. Might be an exaggeration, but, I get all that. I'm just saying, the atmosphere that we're walking into this weekend is going to be bonkers, right? They are wanting to storm the field. They are wanting to name this game like they named the prayer at Jordan Hare. They're wanting, all the smoke this weekend, right? There is not anyone in Auburn, Alabama that doesn't believe that they're going to win this game this weekend, right? Well, we can't look ahead to Ole Miss. I mean, you have to be in, Jordan Hare 100%. You had to be onto them as of Sunday, right? So, gonna be a slobber knocker. And you follow that up with Ole Miss. And then, you get a week off, and then you face Florida. And it's like, well, Florida's not very good. But that's a neutral site, a rivalry game. And Florida, no matter how bad DJ Lagway's looked, so far this season, or how much he's having to deal with injuries, they've had a defense since day one. And they showed what happened when their defense, or when a defense can get pressure on a quarterback, what kind of effect it has on them. Now, granted, Arch Manning, the verdict is still out on him. Honestly, the media should be ashamed of themselves. I know they're not. They don't give 2 shits. But the hype that they put on that dude, and again, I'm not the only person saying this, but, I mean, granted, it looks like Texas may have the worst offensive line ever assembled. I don't know what the deal is there. As much money as they have, it looks like they just want to go spend it all on skill players and, say, screw you offensive line, good luck. So maybe if you give Arch Manning a little bit more time, he picks you apart. But we'll definitely see, a couple of weeks after Florida. I think we had Mississippi State mixed in there beforehand. But when we're playing at Mississippi State, guess what Texas will be doing? Texas will be sitting at home on a bye week before us. So 2 more teams, and this isn't the only year it's happened, but 2 more teams that face us have a bye before us. And I know all teams have 2 byes, and, it's kind of hard to work it out, blah, blah, blah. But it always seems like whenever we have our 2 byes, the team that we're playing the next week also has a bye. But then at some point during the year, 2 or 3 more times, teams that we play the next week, when we're playing, South Carolina or Vandy or Tennessee or whatever, they're sitting at home waiting for us to get done. And in the Kentucky game, we had a couple of guys go down, right? Our offensive line is in shambles. And I'll say this, though, they've really stepped up. I mean, our run game is back to what it used to, kind of be like. It's what we kind of expect, thanks to Bowens and in that offensive line. But it's piece metal together, man. And it's, we need to get some guys back there, but we, have had, Freeland go down. We had Morris go down and come back in. Then we lose Jordan Hall on the defensive line, who's kind of been MIA, but, has contributed to helping, stop the run game pretty well, obviously. So, I don't, I feel like I'm probably a little more pessimistic than I probably should be at times, but I just named off Auburn, Ole Miss, Florida, who's seemingly, not super good, but, they have a defense. And if you give Lagway time, boy, they've got some wide receivers themselves that can ball. And they showed you against Texas. If you give them the chance, they'll do it to you. And you have Mississippi State, who, has, a good freshman quarterback. They have a wide receiver named Anthony Evans, who used to be a Georgia Bulldog, who definitely would love to stick it to his former team, I'm sure. And then you'll have a well-rested Texas coming to Athens before you play Charlotte. And I named, all those teams there. And while, other than Ole Miss, they don't all, sound like juggernauts or anything. You have Georgia Tech at the end of the regular season too. And you can't tell me that if we're sitting there at 9-2, that Georgia Tech isn't going to pull out. I mean, they're going to pull out all the stops anyway to try to beat us and try to keep us out of the playoff. But that will be the biggest game in Georgia Tech history in the foreseeable past or whatever. Maybe except for their split national championship, that they had back in 1990. Maybe that one was bigger, but it's going to be crazy. And that game's at the Benz. And it more than likely will be, more than 50% Georgia fans, which is good. That game, even though it's in Atlanta, every other year is always more Georgia fans than Georgia Tech fans anyway. But if Georgia Tech's sitting there at 9-2 or 10-1, and we're sitting there at 9-2, you can't tell me that, if we're both fighting for our playoff lives in that game, we're not looking good. Because Haynes King, as long as he stays healthy by then, which I wonder how well he'll be able to hold up with as much as he does each day. If he holds up, we are in real trouble. And 9-3, I know some people say, well, that could still get you in, maybe. It's not getting Georgia in. Georgia doesn't get the benefit of the doubt. And you can say, oh, you're just saying that, but it's true. I can elaborate on that later. But I'm telling you, this next stretch of 5 games is going to make or break the season. You lose 2 of them, you're done. No ifs, ands, or buts, right? You lose 1, and that Georgia Tech game becomes the biggest that it's been in my lifetime. And I'm 41 years old. So, telling you, we've got to find some sort of way, some stunts, some cornerback blitzes, I don't know, but we've got to affect the quarterback 10 times more than we've done so far. And at this point, I just don't know where it's going to come from, because at this point, I mean, seeing is believing. And what I see is, you let, Damon Wilson, you didn't pay him, you let him go off to Missouri, and he's already got 3.5 sacks. That would lead this team. That would lead this Georgia team, right? And, I mean, Cole stepping up, C.J. Allen stepping up, Raylan Wilson stepping up, but we've got to have more. And if we don't, we're going to be in a bad way come the day after Thanksgiving, and after that game, because we very well could be sitting at 9-3 and looking at a bowl game that most people aren't going to want to be at, because they're not going to be in the playoffs. So it's on Glenn Schumann and Kirby Smart, and to a lesser extent, Will Muschamp, and everyone else, Robinson, Uribe, anybody else that, D-Bay, or I'm not sure, one of the other defensive coaches, to get this straight. And, we've got to come out and make a statement against Auburn, and then hope that the 3:30 matchup against Ole Miss, we're healthy enough to come in there and battle and come out on top at home. And if we can get by these next 2 games, I feel a lot better about the rest of our season. But yeah, our season very well could ride on these next 2 games. But other than that, tell me what you guys think. Correct me if I'm wrong on a couple of things, or tell me what you find out and research on the couple of things that I mentioned about the opponents having bye weeks before they play, and kind of check me if you need to, but go in, like video, join the channel. Like Mike said, got some plans on some more things coming out down the line, and you'd love to have some dialogue back and forth with you guys. All right, appreciate you listening. Have a great day.